5 Pre-Pageant Master Exam. May 26, 2023, two brokers decide to list a property together and agree to split the commission 50-50. One broker finds the buyer and then refuses to share the commission. In an occurrence like this, an action could be filed, with the Department of Real Estate. With the Department of Real Estate and in a civil court. With a civil and criminal court. In a civil court. What is in a civil court? If a broker agreed to share a commission with another broker and then refused to pay the other broker, the unpaid broker could file an action in a civil court. Narrative report is the most comprehensive of the three types: letter form, short form, narrative. That includes all the information obtained by the appraiser as well as the methodology behind the calculations and value conclusion. But as comprehensive as it may be, it does not contain the buyer's financial condition, because how you pay for the property is not relevant to the value of the property itself. An easement on real estate would terminate if the holder of the dominant tenement recorded a list pendens notice of non-responsibility. Quitclaim deed, deed of reconveyance. What is quitclaim deed? The easement can be terminated by the dominant tenement if they record a quitclaim deed. The dominant tenement benefits from the easement. The servient tenement is burdened by it. Just think of what the word dominant means. It means they are in control. Thus they have the right to end the easement. The law of agency is an area of commercial law dealing with a set of contractual, quasi-contractual and non-contractual fiduciary relationships that involve a person, called the agent, that is authorized to act on behalf of another, called the principal, to create legal relations with a third party. 1 point equals 1%, thus 2 points are 2% of $50,000, or $1,000. Which becomes part of the buyer's total obligation to the lender. How long after receiving the TDS does the buyer have to rescind the contract? The transferee shall have 3 days after delivery in person. The mere voluntary offer of an agent is not enough to create an agency relationship. A limited partner in a limited partnership who, on a part-time basis, is acting under a separate, written property management agreement to rent the real property of the limited partnership. California requires individuals and corporations to hold a broker's license when performing certain real estate related activities for a fee. This includes things like listing real estate for rent or lease, marketing properties to locate prospective tenants, locating properties to rent or lease, managing income producing properties, and collecting rents from tenants. Brokers' licenses are not required for anyone who manages their own property. Individuals who arrange transient occupancies in single-family homes, common interest developments and apartments are also not required to hold a broker's license. If the owner of a condominium defaults on his mortgage, the owners of the remaining units are not affected by the defaulting owner's actions. Misappropriated his client's funds. Misappropriation is the intentional, illegal use of the property or funds of another person for one's own use or other unauthorized purpose. Conversion is the misappropriation of funds, while commingling is the mixing of a broker's personal funds with funds held in escrow. Under which of the following types of liens can both the personal property and the real property of the debtor be sold to pay the debt? Real estate tax lien, mechanics lien, assessment lien, judgment lien. What is judgment lien? Most liens are against a specific property, such as a primary residence. Thus, a contractor seeking payment for a new deck cannot have a homeowner's car attached in settlement. A judgment lien, however, is a decision directed by the courts and can apply to whatever assets it deems appropriate. Lucy was contemplating opening a hardware store or a post office. She did not want to invest in a property with a high cap rate. She would probably want, the hardware store because it has more potential income, the hardware store because it has more growth potential, the post office because it has less overhead, the post office because it is a lower risk. What is the post office? Because it is a lower risk. A post office would have a lower capitalization rate because of lower risk, as compared to a hardware store which would have a high cap rate because it's a higher risk. Capitalization rate is the net income of a property divided by the value. It shows a direct relationship between the value and the income. The higher that is, the more of a risk the investment would be. It is grounds for revocation or suspension of his real estate license. Realtor. A registered is a registered trade name that may only be used by members of the National Association of Realtors. A registered realtors. A registered subscribe to a strict code of ethics which governs their conduct. If you are not a member of the Association of Realtors, You cannot use that name in your advertising. Personal income taxes are structured using rates that are. What is progressive? Progressive means the more you make, the more you pay. It might also be termed graduated. Legal, if proper disclosures are made to all parties to the transaction. Underscore. Closing cost credits, or rebates, from a broker to a seller or buyer are allowed, as long as proper disclosures are made to all parties in the transaction. In an estate at sufferance, the tenancy is by a lessee who lawfully occupies the landlord's property, but then continues to occupy the property improperly after his rights have expired. Think of it this way: the landlord and the estate are suffering because rent is not being paid. The other types of estates mentioned here are actual lease agreements, but this is a situation of one party being unwilling to abide by the terms of any agreements previously reached. Joe is a listing agent. Joe cannot legally answer a seller's question about the buyer's race, due to the Listing Application Act, Jones-Meyer Act, Sherman Antitrust Act, Rumford Act. What is Rumford Act? The Rumford Fair Housing Act was passed in 1963 by the California legislature to help end racial discrimination by property owners and landlords who refuse to rent or sell their property to people based on race. They are the evidence of the debt. Promissory notes are negotiable instruments that serve as evidence of debt. When a title company issues a California standard policy of title insurance, the policyholder is insured against loss which occurs because of the rights of the parties in possession. A defect in the chain of title, already known by the insured prior to the issuance of the policy. Unrecorded liens and encumbrances which are not disclosed by the public records. Forgery in the chain of recorded title. What is forgery in the chain of recorded title? Standard policy of title insurance protects against forgery and improper delivery. However, it does not include a survey or on-site inspection. Rehabilitation of property means restoring real property to an improved state. The restoration is usually needed because the property's condition has worsened. A protection period clause, safety clause, in a listing will allow a broker to collect a commission for a specified period of time after the term of the listing has expired. It is a designated period of time to close deals with prospects that the licensee has been working with during the term of the listing. This is not a time to find a new prospect. They must put the name of the prospects in writing at the end of the listing period in order to earn a commission during the protection period clause. Misappropriation is the intentional, illegal use of the property or funds of another person for one's own use or other unauthorized purpose. This is different than commingling, which is the mixing of client funds with broker funds. It would be to the advantage of lending institutions to waive prepayment penalties when which of the following is occurring? Funds are easily available and the demand for loans is low. The Federal Reserve drastically raises the discount rate and reserve requirement. Funds are in short supply and the demand for loans is high. The Federal Reserve sets standards for banks to follow. What is funds are in short supply and the demand for loans is high? It would be to the advantage of lending institutions to waive prepayment penalties when funds are in short supply and the demand for loans is high. This incentivizes early mortgage payoff, which creates an inflow of funds that can be loaned back out. A kiosk is a standalone information booth, a shopping area or mall. A grant deed has been issued to Eric Riva that reads, Eric Riva, Edux. What does Edux mean? And without further warranties. And wife, and others. And, without further encumbrances. What is wife? An old term usually found on deeds, tax records and such. It has been supplanted by more modern forms such as tenancy in common and community property that recognize husband and wife as individuals. An expensive home that later became surrounded by cheaper homes would suffer a loss in property value attributable to economic obsolescence. Economic obsolescence is when your property loses value and the loss in value has nothing to do with the property itself. Economic obsolescence is the most difficult to cure because it is due to causes outside of the property lines, thus they are usually outside of your control. Example of these would be murder, crime or increasing airport noise. Escrow can release disputed funds on written instructions from all relevant parties or upon court order. An acceleration clause in a trust deed or mortgage authorizes the lender to demand payment in full if a certain event happens, such as failure to pay an installment by a certain date, a change of ownership without the lender's consent, destruction of the property, or some other event which endangers the security of the loan. Must give a parking space near the door to the handicapped person, if one is available and a need is demonstrated. The equal access aspects of fair housing legislation do not necessarily mean equal treatment. Reasonable accommodation must also be made to meet the needs of handicapped people, including exceptions to standard policies such as convenient parking and guide dogs. You can sublet a space unless stated otherwise. The word surrender presupposes the possession or ownership of the thing that is to be returned or given up. In landlord-tenant law, surrender occurs when a tenant agrees to return the lease premises to the landlord before the expiration of the lease and the landlord agrees to accept the return of the premises. The Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, or RESPA, was enacted by Congress to provide home buyers and sellers with improved disclosures of settlement costs and to eliminate abusive practices in the real estate settlement process. RESPA does allow commissions to be split with parties that actually perform services, like the MLS, a similar home sold by a motivated seller to a motivated buyer. This relates to the willing seller, willing buyer concept of value. Alienation of title is the conveyance of title. The opposite is acquisition of title, to gain possession of title. A tenant improvement allowance is money, labor, supplies or other consideration given by a landlord to a tenant to construct the premises for occupancy. Tenant allowances address the improvements to be done above the ceiling, HVAC, ducts, electrical lines, and below the ceiling, doors, walls, floor covering. They can also be called T allowance, Ts, or a construction allowance, while disclosure statements, purchase contracts, and even exclusive agency contracts are also legal documents that the broker or salesperson enters into with the clients. It is the listing agreement that clearly defines the relationships and agreements between the broker and principal. When analyzing the income produced by a property, an appraiser is concerned with, all of the other options are correct. Prospect of continued income, quality of tenants, amount of income, what is all of the other options are correct. All of these are important factors to consider when calculating net income for capitalization purposes. The monthly payment on a mortgage loan is, by statute, considered late when received by the lender, 10 days after the due date, 3 days after the due date, more than 10 days after the due date, 5 days after the due date. What is more than 10 days after the due date? Payment is considered late if the lender receives it more than 10 days after the due date. In the sale of real property from a deceased person, which of the following would normally determine the amount of commission to be paid to the broker? The administrator or executor of the estate, the board of directors of the local MLS, the California Real Estate Commission. A court order. What is a court order? A broker selling the real property of a deceased person is known as a probate sale. Generally, the property gets divided among inheritors or sold to pay debts. The broker's commission is set by the court in a probate sale. Which of the following provides a buyer with the best assurance of clear, marketable title? General warranty deed, title insurance, certificate of title, abstract of title. What is title insurance? Title insurance provides the best assurance of marketable title. A special warranty deed differs from a general warranty deed in that the grantor's covenant in the special warranty deed, applies only to a definite limited time, protects all subsequent owners of the property, is implied and is not written in full, covers the time back to the original title. What is applies only to a definite limited time. The more common deed in most states is the general warranty, because it establishes the ownership trail and validity of title going back to the original recorded ownership, for example, the purchase of Manhattan Island and all subsequent divisions, subdivisions and resales. Under a special warranty deed, an owner transfers property guaranteeing the quality of title only during the period of his or her ownership, leaving subsequent buyers vulnerable to prior claims. Some institutions in California are exempt from paying property taxes, including nonprofit educational institutions, religious institutions, hospitals, and charitable organizations. Truth in lending laws are applicable to residential real estate mortgages, but do not apply to commercial transactions, personal property transactions, or seller-financed real property transactions like land contracts. Civil rights laws apply to owners of residential property, rental units, hotels and virtually any other building offering housing or accommodations to the general public. May note the exceptions in the deed of conveyance, most commonly known as restrictive covenants. Such deed restrictions are often used to maintain the consistency of a neighborhood by, for example, stipulating that only traditional home styles of a particular size and painted in traditional colors may be constructed and occupied within the subdivision. These are encumbrances on the property since they limit current and future owners in how they use the property. Trends and population composition. Property management is the operation, control, and oversight of real estate management indicates a need to be cared for, monitored and accountability given for its useful life and condition. This is much akin to the role of management in any business. The neighborhood market survey is more about population than the other options. Loan qualifying tool. Debt to income ratio is used by lenders as a loan qualifying tool. It is a method of calculating how much debt is owed in relation to how much income is coming in. A title company could make a title search by searching the records of the County Recorder's Federal Land and County Clerk's Office. A title search is a review of all recorded documents affecting a specific piece of property to determine the present condition of title. As timely as possible. Time is of the essence. A phrase in a contract that means that performance by one party at or within the period specified in the contract is necessary to enable that party to require performance by the other party. Failure to act within the time required constitutes a breach of the contract. It is illegal for any advertisement to suggest that a loan can be acquired over the telephone. For example, if a mortgage company ran an advertisement that read "Just call us at 1-800-88 for a loan," the advertisement would be illegal. Subordination clause is a clause in an agreement which states that the current claim on any debts will take priority over any other claims formed in other agreements made in the future. Subordination is the act of yielding priority. A contract to keep the offer open. An option is a contract to keep an offer to sell or lease real property open for a set period of time. When a real estate licensee negotiates the sale of a mobile home in California, written notice of the transfer must be provided to the Department of Housing and Community Development within. What is 10 calendar days? Notice of transfer must be submitted within 10 calendar days of the sale of a mobile home. A fee based on the amount of time and effort. There are two fundamental reasons for the time and effort rather than valuation method. First is the fact that the differences between any two properties make it impossible to relate the complexity of the task to the value of the property. A high-end property could be a relative no-brainer while a particular mid-market home could have dozens of variables to be analyzed. The second reason is that basing fees on value places an obvious incentive on appraisers to estimate high, thus distorting reality. RESPA would prohibit which of the following acts? What is paying of kickbacks? RESPA concerns itself only with educating consumers about the true costs of borrowing and standardizing lending practices. As such, referral fees and kickbacks are prohibited. A borrower takes out a mortgage loan that requires monthly payments of $875.70 for 20 years and a final payment of $24,095. This is what type of loan? What is balloon? A balloon payment mortgage is a mortgage which does not fully amortize over the term of the note, thus leaving a balance due at maturity. The final payment is called a balloon payment because of its large size. Balloon payment mortgages are more common in commercial real estate than in residential real estate. A variable interest rate loan allows for increases or decreases in the interest rate on the loan based on money market conditions. Puffing is generally an expression or exaggeration made by a salesperson or found in an advertisement that concerns the quality of goods offered for sale. It presents opinions rather than facts and is usually not considered a legally binding promise. A loan estimate. When a home buyer applies for a home loan, the TILA, RESPA Integrated Disclosure Rule requires the lender to provide a loan estimate to the buyer within 3 days of receipt of the loan application, and all revisions have to be delivered at least 7 days before closing. The loan estimate details the loan terms, mortgage payments, costs at closing and other costs and fees related to the loan, many of which cannot change. When the owner is out of town and has instructed the licensee that no showing may be made in his absence, it is permitted for an agent to refuse to show a property to a minority buyer if the owner is out of town, and as long as the owner left instructions that the house was not to be shown to anyone until his return. Using funds from a client's trust account for personal use. Conversion is the act of using your client's money for personal use. The term encumbered refers to a situation where an asset or property has a legal claim or burden placed upon it. It means that the asset is not free and clear but is subject to certain restrictions, obligations, or liabilities. The term appurtenant is a legal term used to describe a right or property interest that is attached or connected to another property or right. It refers to something that is associated with or belongs to another property, typically referred to as the dominant property. The term subject to is a phrase commonly used in legal and financial contexts to indicate that a particular action, obligation, or condition is dependent on or governed by another factor or event. It signifies that a certain action or situation is contingent upon the occurrence or existence of something else. A deed to real property has the statement subject to an easement. The term subject to would mean the burden land is appurtenant, a liability, limited encumbered, what is encumbered. Subject to as being dependent or conditional upon something. Sam owned a triplex valued at $150,000 with an adjusted basis of $70,000. King owned a duplex valued at $145,000. Both properties were owned free and clear. They exchanged their properties, with King giving Sam $5,000 in cash. For federal income tax purposes, what is Sam has a recognized gain. Sam and King exchanged the properties. Ultimately the basis and value of both properties were made to be equal due to the exchange. King gave Sam an additional $5,000 which resulted in Sam recognizing a gain from the exchange. Examples of voidable contracts include contracts signed under duress, or contracts entered into with threat or menace. Providing for control of rentals. A zoning ordinance is a written regulation and law that defines how property in specific geographic zones can be used. Zoning ordinances specify whether zones can be used for residential or commercial purposes, and may also regulate lot size, placement, bulk, or density, and the height of structures. The higher the ear, the greater the efficiency of the appliance. Licensees owe honesty and disclosure of all material facts to both buyer and seller. Material facts do not need to be disclosed to mortgage companies. That's because their primary interest in the property is value, and any material defects will already have been factored into the price well before closing. David wants to use the GRM to find the value of the property. What data does David need to obtain from comparable properties to accurately calculate a GRM? What is the annual rent and the selling price? The gross rent multiplier, GRM, is calculated by dividing the monthly or annual gross rent into the selling price of the property. Market value is the present worth of one commodity to draw on the open market. How much an item costs has no relevance to its value. The cost a person originally pays for an item is not relevant to what it would sell for on the current market. Definitions of market value is least concerned with what is market cost. The term option refers to the party who holds or possesses an option contract. An option contract grants the option the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell a specific asset, typically within a specified time frame and at a predetermined price. An option is under no obligation to buy the property in question, so the option isn't bound to perform the option contract. It is their option to buy it or not. To create an option contract, however, the option must have provided consideration to the optioner for the unilateral contract that keeps the option open, should the option choose to purchase the property. And the option doesn't have any rights in the land until they exercise the option and purchase the property. Next year's real property taxes become a lien on January 1st. Real property taxes become a lien on Jan 1st. A bill of sale is a written instrument, like a receipt, which passes title of personal property, such as furniture purchased as a part of a home sale, from seller to buyer. Personal property differs from real property in a number of respects, most importantly its portability. Cars, furniture, clothing, paintings, jewelry, appliances, and just about any other non-food item one buys are examples of personal property. On a settlement statement, the cost of the lender's title insurance policy required for a new loan is usually shown as A. What is a debit to the buyer? A settlement statement is a document that summarizes all of the fees and charges that a borrower and lender face during the settlement process of a loan transaction. Different types of loans have varying requirements for settlement statement documentation. Many states determine the order of water rights according to which users of the water hold a recorded beneficial use permit. This allocation of water rights is determined by what is the doctrine of prior appropriation. All terms relate to water rights, with riparian, the right to use water adjacent to one's property, being the most common in sections of the U.S. where water is abundant. However, in states where water is scarcer, a form of prior appropriation applies. Also known as first in time is first in right. It grants water rights to divert a specific amount of water from a specific source to irrigate a specific piece of property. Those rights are then assigned a priority based on when the right was first used or applied for. In periods of peak demand, they give those whose claim is the oldest the right to get their water first. No valid agreement exists because a counteroffer voids any prior offer. A real estate counteroffer is generated by a home seller after a buyer has submitted an offer to purchase and the offer includes terms that aren't agreeable. Note that when entering into the counteroffer stage, the original contract is deemed null and void and the counteroffer becomes the new proposed contract. The majority of money used for loans of real estate come from what is individual savings? Most of the funds used by financial institutions that specialize in residential real estate are derived from the individual savings of depositors. A trustor defaults on his loans and refuses to reinstate the deed of trust. The most expedient thing for the beneficiary to do is to institute a what is a trustee sale? In a foreclosure by trustee sale, the trustee must wait 3 months before publishing puts up for sale. The trustor has the right of reinstatement until 5 days before the sale goes through. This is the most expedient method of sale for a beneficiary to pursue if a trustor has defaulted. Whatever is negotiated between the broker and seller. The duration for a listing may be for any length of time agreed to by both the broker and the seller. Any authorized employee of the broker. A trust fund account is usually a separate checking account that is used to separate a client's money from the broker's money. Although a trust fund account can hold up to $200 of a broker's money without issue, any employee who is authorized by the broker can withdraw monies from the trust fund account. That authorization does not have to be in writing. An attorney in fact. Disinterested means being able to act in an objective manner without any hidden motivation or prospect of gain. For example, a person who made a secret deal to sign a contract contrary to his client's best interests in exchange for an under-the-table payment would not be disinterested. When crops are harvested and put in storage, they become personal property. They are immovable and are sold with a bill of sale. The doctrine of embezzlement states that annual crops cultivated, worked labored, by a tenant are treated as the tenant's property rather than the landowner's. Even while they're still in the ground. The tenant maintains an implied right to harvest the crops. A quitclaim deed conveys only the present right, title and interest of the, what is grantor. The quitclaim deed transfers only whatever right, title and interest the grantor had in the property at the time of the execution of the deed and does not pass to the grantee any title or interest subsequently acquired by the grantor, after acquired title. Impose fines, revoke licenses and promulgate rules and regulations. As head of the California Department of Real Estate, the Commissioner promulgates rules and regulations in the California Code of Regulations that essentially have the effect of law. The Commissioner also has the sole authority to grant, limit, suspend, or revoke a real estate license in the state of California. Not even the courts have this power. Abandonment is when a tenant voluntarily vacates the property. To move in early or make repairs before the close of escrow, a buyer must obtain the seller's written permission. This could also be handled through an interim occupancy agreement, which allows a buyer to move into a property prior to closing. Freehold estate is an estate in which ownership is for an indeterminate length of time. That would be fee estate. The other options are all examples of less than freehold estates. Until the land contract is paid in full, what is the status of the purchaser's interest in the property? Purchaser has equitable title in the property. Equitable title indicates the right to use and possess and enjoy the equity gained. Ridgeboard, in a frame house, the highest structural point. The principal attributes of an encroachment are, 1. It is accidental and 2. It involves only part of a structure. Typically, the issue would be resolved by selling Sarah an easement or release or, if practical, actually moving the structure. A recorded subdivision plat is used in the, what is lot and block system. Lot and block is the final survey of property being readied for development and identifies each individual parcel in a subdivision. A plat is a map of a subdivision that represents a tract of land, showing the boundaries and location of individual properties, streets, easements and other pertinent information. Easement by prescription, requires 5 years of open, notorious, hostile, and continuous use. Confrontation with the owner is not a factor. Easement by prescription can be terminated for non-use. When a real estate licensee advertises properties on the internet, Which of the following best describes the licensee's responsibilities? What is the licensee must exercise proper supervision over any non-licensee who responds to inquiries. Unlicensed assistants are not allowed to solicit buyers or sellers for a licensee. Any activity by an unlicensed assistant in this regard would be a violation of California real estate law by both the unlicensed assistant and the licensee. A licensee must examine and approve any advertisement generated by an unlicensed assistant before publication. A licensee must also supervise any responses to inquiries by an unlicensed assistant, including those that come via online advertisements. An appraiser who is to appraise a commercial property with an estimated value of $550,000 must hold which of the following appraisal license? What is Certified General Real Estate Appraiser? A certified general real estate appraiser is the highest license that would be issued to an appraiser. They have no limit on the estimated value of real property they could appraise. A buyer properly revoked his offer after receiving the property condition disclosure and requests the return of his earnest money. The broker must promptly return the earnest money. An earnest payment is a specific form of security deposit made in some major transactions such as real estate dealings or required by some official procurement processes to demonstrate that the applicant is serious and willing to demonstrate an earnest of good faith about wanting to complete the transaction. Processing a loan includes an analysis of the buyer's credit, implying a specific yield on a note which is different from the interest specified in said note. Misleading advertising is any advertisement that is deceptive or gives a false impression to consumers. Per California Re 884 to 10235. Indicating or otherwise implying any specific yield or return on any note other than the interest rate specified in said note shall be prima facie evidence that such advertisement is misleading or deceptive unless the advertisement sets forth the actual interest rate specified in the note and the discount from the outstanding principal balance at which it is being offered for sale. Title to personal property is transferred by bill of sale are for personal property, not real property. 1 year from the date she passed the exam. Although most people who pass the exam are anxious to get their license and begin practicing real estate, the rules do allow up to a year to make the application. The chance of a substandard loan becoming a part of their portfolio. Substandard loans refer to borrowers with a bad credit history, so they are high risk. Lenders try to minimize the number of these in their lending portfolios. Lis pendens is Latin for litigation pending, which will help you to remember that while a lis pendens isn't a lien, it is a notice at litigation. A possible lien is pending. The other terms listed deal with deeds, habendum clause and general warranty deed, or mortgages. Estoppel certificate. Lucy purchased her home from Gary. As part of the purchase price, Gary took back Lucy's note secured by a mortgage on the property. This created what is a specific lien? Specific liens only burdens a specific parcel of the owner's property. Examples include trust deeds, mortgages, mechanics liens, or property taxes. A net lease is a property lease in which the tenant pays all expenses normally associated with ownership, such as utilities, maintenance, repairs, insurance, and taxes. Actual fraud. A licensee would be guilty of actual fraud if he made a promise to advertise in a magazine and then did not. Actual fraud is an act intended to deceive another. Making a false statement, making a promise without intending to perform it. An appurtenant easement always passes when the property is sold. Appurtenances are said to run with the land and they require no separate conveyance. Appurtenances include easements, stock in a mutual water company, covenants, and minerals. They are considered real property. If, in extreme cold or hot weather, the temperature of the inside of an exterior wall is the same as the temperature of other interior walls, the insulation is adequate. R value refers to the resistance to heat transmission. When the owner of a property believes that her property has been overassessed by the county assessor, she should contact the What is Assessment Appeals Board. If a buyer or any other property owner felt that his property has been overassessed, he can make an appeal to the Assessment Appeals Board. Governments and municipalities can only seize property, other than in criminal cases, for the public good and through eminent domain, which is a process, not an arbitrary action. Part of that process involves determining fair compensation to the owner. A tenant's right to use a premises they have leased is called an What is leasehold estate? A leasehold estate is an ownership of a temporary right to hold land or property. The lessee, or tenant, holds rights to real property by some form of title from a lessor or landlord. Although a tenant does hold rights to real property, a leasehold estate is typically considered personal property. Turnkey is a term used to describe a property that is ready for occupancy, and ready to be put into immediate use, meaning it is equipped with, or includes, everything needed to operate it. When a buyer gives the agent a post-dated check, what is may be retained by must be disclosed to the seller. An agent may accept a post-dated check from a buyer as long as it is disclosed to the seller. The building with the health and fitness store will probably appraise for less than the other building. Earning potential is often taken into consideration when evaluating commercial properties. Income approach. The building with the health fitness store will probably appraise for less because the national retail chain is likely to have greater earning potential. When there is a change in ownership, property is always reassessed upon sale or property transfer. This reassessment usually results in a supplemental tax bill. The payment of any increase in property tax due to the reassessment and any resulting supplemental tax bill would then become the responsibility of the buyer. Loan amount. Like points, discount points are one-time charges equal to 1% of the loan amount for each point charged. Attorney in fact, a type of agency relationship where one person holds a power of attorney allowing him to execute legal documents on behalf of another. Decisions made by the attorney in fact are binding on the principal. Both are encumbrances. Liens are, of course, serious in that they indicate the owner has failed to pay a debt secured directly or indirectly by the property. Easements, on the other hand, are generally a practical necessity for most residential properties. A person must hold a valid license before he or she undertakes any real estate activity on behalf of a third party for compensation. To define the purpose, appraisers can legitimately come up with different values for the same property depending on the purpose of the appraisal. For example, an appraisal for a second mortgage generally would be more conservative than one for a competitive market analysis for the purpose of selling the home. Additionally, an appraisal for insurance purposes focuses more on the costs of replacing the structure rather than what the house, land and intangibles, such as curb appeal, would be worth on the open market. An independent appraiser who works on a fee basis. A fee appraiser is a non-salaried professional who furnishes appraisal services for a fee. A closing disclosure must be given to the borrower by the lender at no charge. Warehousing refers to the process whereby banks and other lenders make mortgage loans to consumers for the purpose of quickly selling those loans on the secondary market. The warehousing occurs when individual loans are bundled, often with a common element such as the size of the mortgage or creditworthiness of the borrowers, and sold as a single unit. On an escrow closing statement, an existing mortgage that is to be assumed by the buyer is treated as what is a credit to the buyer. A loan being assumed by the buyer is listed as a credit to the buyer and a debit to the seller. The closing statement looks at the loan in relation to the purchase price of the property. The assumed loan is a credit for the buyer toward the purchase of the property, even if the assumed loan is a debit to the buyer's personal accounts. Which of the following activities requires a real estate license in California? A person who manages the apartment complex he or she lives in. A person selling his or her own home. A real estate secretary who hosts open house weekends. A trustee overseeing the sale of a foreclosed property. What is a real estate secretary who hosts open house weekends? As a general rule, what creates the need for a real estate licenses is engaging in any part of the real estate transaction processes for third parties for compensation. Can start the foreclosure proceedings and sell the property in the case of default. The trustee in a trust deed is responsible for starting the foreclosure proceedings and to sell the property in the case of default. Title: the evidence one has of right to possession of land. To real property can be acquired by an individual by all of the following methods, except prescription succession patent escheat. What is escheat? Escheat is a reversion of property to the state in the absence of an individual owner. Usually occurs when a property owner dies intestate, without a will, and without heirs. An individual cannot acquire property through escheat. When a real estate broker speaks of tax shelter, he or she is referring to income tax, net income, real property taxes, principal payments. What is income tax? Tax shelter is a general term used to include any property or other investment which gives the owner certain income tax advantages, such as deductions for property taxes, mortgage interest or depreciation. When making a loan, amortization tables are used in order to determine the Interest rate. Monthly payment. April. Term of the loan. What is monthly payment? An amortization schedule is a complete table of periodic loan payments, showing the amount of principal and the amount of interest that comprise each payment until the loan is paid off at the end of its term. 3 business days before the closing of a real estate loan transaction, a mortgage loan originator must provide the borrower with the closing disclosure, CD. This disclosure is in keeping with which of the following? What is TRID? TRID is the TILA, RESPA Integrated Disclosure Rule. TILA is the Truth in Lending Act and RESPA is the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. The CFPB modified both rules in its TRID final ruling. Refused to fill out that portion of the loan application. Applicants can refuse to answer questions regarding gender, creed, color, or race, and it should not affect their loan. A mechanics lien is the first, and usually most cost-effective, step for a person providing labor and or materials to a homeowner to recover monies owed, in large part because of the pressure it puts on the homeowner to settle quickly and without costly court involvement. Loss of value in real estate from any cause. Although most commonly used to depreciate the value of a commercial or income property over its useful life for tax purposes, it's important to remember depreciation is actually much broader. It applies to any factor, from functional obsolescence to new highway construction, that diminishes a property's value. Eminent domain involves a jurisdiction condemning or otherwise expropriating private property in the name of the public good. Usually that means major projects such as airport expansions, highways, schools, and such a broken bar, though there have been cases of using eminent domain to condemn well-ordered middle-class neighborhoods to make way for high-end developments that will provide a higher tax base. In most cases, the federal, state or local jurisdiction is required to pay the owner fair market value for their property. An impound or reserve account most benefits whom? What is the lender? Also known as escrow accounts, impound accounts accumulate funds from closing costs and monthly payments to ensure that property taxes and homeowners insurance are kept current. Carl purchased a 13-unit apartment building. If he reports his income on a cash basis, he can deduct all of the following on his next income tax return, except, what is except a loss of rental income due to vacancies suffered by 5 units. Vacancy losses are not deductible on an income property, but federal tax laws allow a property owner to deduct depreciation, mortgage interest, and maintenance costs. Upkeep. What item will appear as a debit on the buyer's closing statement? Unpaid property taxes. The purchase price. Prepaid rents. None of the other options are correct. What is the purchase price? The price is always a credit for the seller and a debit for the buyer. Concurrent ownership. A joint tenancy estate requires 2 or more people, which is considered concurrent ownership. Property owners need not be married to be joint tenants. Ownership in severalty is ownership by one party only, and community property applies to married couples only. Adjusting for differences between the comparable and the subject property. The most difficult part of the market data method of appraising is adjusting for differences in the properties, as this requires a general understanding of construction costs and quality as well as the subjective value of some of the differences between the subject property and any comparables. In valuing a single-family residence by the comparison approach, an appraiser would make adjustments to what is the comparable properties. The objective of an appraisal is to arrive at a fair estimate of the subject property's value based on what comparable properties have actually sold for. The most reliable way of achieving this is to make additions and subtractions from the comparables rather than the other way around. Regarding a promissory note when getting financing, what is the deed of trust secures the promissory note? The deed of trust secures the promissory note and the property. If payment is not made according to the terms of the note and deed of trust, the beneficiary may instruct the trustee to foreclose as set forth in the deed of trust. A specific lien is a lien against a certain parcel of real estate, while a general lien covers all of a debtor's property. A specific lien is granted only with respect to a particular asset. A general lien is on the opposite side of the spectrum. A general lien is a lien on all property. This is both the real property and personal property and individual loans, not just one specific real property. Like in the case of a foreclosure. When a trust deed is sold, the parties often use an escrow in order to, what is to ensure that the terms of the transactions are met. At its essence, escrow is the process whereby parties to the transfer or financing of real estate deposit documents, funds, or other things of value with a neutral and disinterested third party. the escrow agent, which are held in trust until a specific event or condition takes place according to specific, mutual written instructions from the parties. Escrow is essentially a clearinghouse for the receipt, exchange, and distribution of the items needed to transfer or finance real estate. When the event occurs or the condition is satisfied, a distribution or transfer takes place. When all of the elements necessary to consummate the real estate transaction have occurred, the escrow is closed. Rejection of the offer by the offeree. If the person receiving an offer, offeree, rejects the offer presented by the offeror, the offer is automatically terminated. It's important to understand the difference between reject and revoke. Reject, dismiss as inadequate, inappropriate, or not to one's taste. Revoke, to nullify by taking back or recalling. Based on the definitions, an offeror can't reject an offer they made, but they can revoke it, while an offeree can't revoke an offer presented to them, but they can reject it. An inquiry by the offeree doesn't affect the status of the offer. Under a lease, the leasehold interest is with the, what is lessee. A leasehold interest is the right to exclusive possession and use of real property for a fixed period of time held by the lessee. Remember, lessor landlord, lessee, tenant. Lessor owns the property. Lessee rents or leases the property. Determine the amount of tax to be paid by property owners. What is the main duty of the county assessor? What is determine the amount of tax to be paid by property owners? The assessor is a local government official who estimates the value of real property within a city, town, or village's boundaries. This value is converted into an assessment, which is one component in the computation of real property tax bills. County Ass determines amount tax paid. The listing agent could provide the buyer with a disclosure, as long as it has been signed by the seller. A seller disclosure is a document completed by the seller that lists any known issues and material facts known about the property during the time they own the home. In most states, the seller is required to provide this disclosure within a few days of mutual acceptance, but a listing agent can provide the disclosure as long as it's been signed by the seller. Broker Pam Wilson sold Matt Cohen a small starter home. During the closing process, it was discovered that Matt was not 19 as he claimed, but a 17-year-old unemancipated minor. What is the status of the contract? The contract is void. In California, minors are not allowed to enter into contracts for real property per California Family Code Section 6701, making this contract void. Minors can enter into some other contracts, however, and those contracts can be voided by the minor because of lack of sufficient age. In those cases, the contract is voidable by the minor but not by the other party. Under TRID, a lender must extend the closing how many business days if the APR is increased by more than 125% before closing. An annual percentage rate, APR, is the annual rate charged for borrowing or earned through an investment. An increase in APR by more than 1/8 of a percentage point, or 0.125, automatically results in a 3-day extension before closing to give the borrower time to review the changes. An option is a contract to keep an offer to sell or lease real property open for a set period of time. The optioner cannot revoke the offer to sell during the designated period of time. An option is under no obligation to buy the property in question. The option is not bound by the option.